to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. I hope that you're getting value out of the show. If you are, I would ask that you please consider giving a rating or a review wherever you listen. Okay, let's get straight to today's show. Here are some things I didn't know about marketing, things that guests on this show helped me realize. And some learnings were shared by guests since the beginning of the podcast. But zooming forward to today, the cost of ignoring them has become so high that it's worth re-emphasizing them. Here's one of the realizations that once held me back. When you're working in a team where others need to be party to a decision, I'll admit I wasn't always cognizant of how unintuitive marketing was to them. And I didn't know their part of the business. You need just as much insight into areas outside of your own function as other people know about your work in marketing. Guest Dan White said it this way: the best marketing people are the ones who understand all of it enough at a certain level to be able to engage with all the functions of their business, including their finance people, because that's a crucial connection for marketing. And when we interact with them, we've got to format our marketing data according to who is going to see it. After you've crunched the numbers, there must be a significant amount of time spent crafting it into a narrative that helps your audience internalize something, even something you've already learned. You think it should be intuitive to someone else seeing your analytics. You think they should come to the same conclusion you did. But without clarity, not only won't they understand what your analysis is, but they could erode your ability to stick around. You need to spend the majority of your time on this part of the process when you're preparing a data presentation. Nick Kelly, designer of dashboards, put it this way: we need to take ownership of those other factors that are going to affect adoption, like the look and the feel, the user experience, and driving adoption. The whole data and technology piece is somewhat trivial compared to providing value to people and making an organizational impact. I've learned that there can be many priorities behind a given marketing initiative. I used to think that you could simply show highly profitable results, but guests have helped me see how mismatched motives between sales and marketing require a role that sits in between them. Debbie Qaqish put it this way: as you grow a marketing operations capability, taking a look at that entire customer journey and saying, what data, what analytics, what content do we have? Who does what where? They become like Switzerland between sales and marketing. I had an individual encounter that showed me how useful having a Switzerland would be. I once had a manufacturing client where my main contact was a sales VP. Their marketing team had one junior marketer in it, and my engagement was to help them run a campaign. One day, I showed the VP the performance of a lead generation campaign, which had actually done quite well. Instead of being impressed, she was concerned. The reason she was concerned only came out after several conversations. She had asked marketing to run campaigns that maximize channel partner sales. That's who all the leads were sent to. But it became clear that the partners, distributors, regularly complained that the leads were no good and that they did all the work to generate sales. They alleged that the company's marketing efforts provided zero benefit, and they demanded deep price discounts to reflect the work that they did. Were they telling the truth? Absolutely not. The VP suspected that the distributors got real benefit out of the marketing leads that the manufacturer's team sent them, but she didn't rebuke their complaints because maybe they were doing all the work. She didn't have any way of knowing. She felt unsure of the value of her marketing efforts and had no way of measuring those operations. So without any figures that prove those leads became real sales, she was going to have to concede on price. But the data that answered the big question, did advertising have a net positive impact on distributors' orders, existed. And with the right setup, the numbers could be crunched and they would show a highly positive ROI. But before we got the marketing campaign rolling again, this metric, the only one the VP considered significant, had to be reported on a dashboard. And for that to happen, we had to build out a marketing operations function, and we ended up building a full back-end data platform to support it. I have a confession. I used to take a negative view of people that contributed to communities. They would normally be consultants. They would hang out, and I thought when they were giving information, it was purely to show off how smart they are and to coax somebody who's stuck on a problem to retain their services. Now, some of them shared helpful things, and I used to write out those things that I would figure out, just like they'd figure it out, but I would keep mine on my private drive. The odd time when I found something that they had said proven useful, I would thank them publicly, but that wasn't often. What made me change my thinking on this was realizing that if everybody did what I had been doing, then there wouldn't be anything that you could search on anywhere or that you could go to chat about the problems. Several guests have changed my mind. One is Johan van de Werken, and he said when he had been grappling with something that he decided, once he figured it out, to write down what he learned in an article on Medium, and he shared it with the community, and that was a mega hit. He said, I wrote that article out of frustration about the lack of documentation from Google about that topic, and clearly by the amount of response it got, he wasn't the only one. What also changed my mind was going to conferences and having hallway chats with people who seemed like superstars on the internet to me. In our hallway chats, though, we would talk about things that I had tried and had some success with, and I'd share it with them, and they'd hear them say, oh, I haven't tried that, or I have no clue how you would solve that, or that's pretty cool, maybe you should go and talk to so-and-so, they're working on that same problem. One of the guys I think of who does this very well is Jim Gianoglio. Quoting him, one thing I always encourage is sharing what you learn, whether it's through blogging or speaking at conferences or just discussing with your peers. Teaching others helps solidify your own understanding, he says. These people have helped me realize that we're in the same boat, and in candid moments, I would hear some of the people I was talking with that they struggled in areas that I considered no-brainers. And some had trouble charging for their work, or they had some element of their back office and productivity tools that was tripping them up, and I'd be able to help them. So I came away from those conferences realizing everybody knows something. Everybody is an expert in something. Nobody is an expert in everything. One misconception is that digital marketing can be done 100% at a tactical level or 100% at a strategic level. I'm convinced you can't just stay a one-trick pony. You have to find a mix of activities that keeps exposing you to both extremes. In times when I veered too heavily over to the strategy side, I'd hear people say, that's all great, but I don't get how I'm supposed to take what you've described and implement it in this tool that we're using. That's when I realized I hadn't been in that tool for a very long time, and I'm not sure my theorizing was doing a lot of help with getting them to use that tool. When he was on the pod, Tim Wilson shared times that he's experienced the same thing. He'd say, and I quote, what are the rows? What are the columns? How am I rolling up or slicing or drilling them down? I think my fear is moving too far away from getting my hands dirty with the data. Now, on the other hand, when I have been too deep in tactics, worried only about how to use a product and obsessing when the maker of that tool moves a button around, I have found that people react to me with, I'm not so concerned about the knobs and the buttons. I'm just hoping that you can help me understand what my overall objective is here. So neither of those poles is good, and you must work really hard to stay in that middle zone. How do you do this in a career where you are an individual contributor? Sometimes you have to look outside of the job for this. In my case, getting strategic when I've had a job that's fairly tactical has meant I go teach a course, or I put myself in the role of a manager or a coach on a volunteer gig. And when I fear that I have been doing too much of that, getting too far onto the strategic side, well, I just fix that by dipping in and becoming an individual contributor. So let's say I'm a manager or I'm coaching a client on a call and I'm going to assign them high-level actions. But I'm worried that they may get off the call and wonder, how are they going to do it? They might listen to the recommendation about a certain strategy, but if they can't pull it off, it won't happen. So what I do is, before the call, I will sit down with the tool open and I'll dry run it, or take a screen grab, or document how to do it. That's how I blend the strategy and the tactics. So know that in digital marketing, it's fine to lean mostly towards doing tactical work that you complement sometimes by doing strategy work. You could consider yourself a strategic tactician. Or if you like to mostly think about strategy, and you complement that with doing some tactical marketing work, you're more akin to a practicing strategist. But no matter what, you've got to ensure that your work life has a mix of both. I confess that all the change in our field that happens sometimes gets me down. There's been a lot. Take just the Google ecosystem in the last few years. They have, in search, gone from showing knowledge boxes to search generative results, and now AI overviews. Their analytics product gone from Urchin through to having Classic and a universal version, and now GA4. And Google AdWords, well, it's renamed to Google Ads, and inside there have been hundreds of changes to the product, from introducing verifications that we all have to complete, removing search terms, shifting from keywords to signals, to launching Performance Max and whole new campaign types. They've even changed their visualization tool, renaming Data Studio to Looker Studio. It's a lot. And I really felt what guest Giannini Fumagalli said when we were commiserating about this. Quote, I used to have all the control of my client's campaign, and now I don't. There's so much uncertainty because machine learning, it just doesn't give you enough data in the reports, unquote. It's the attitude towards change that is actually more important than the change itself. When Gil Gildner came on the pod, he explained how he had made his peace with this pace of change. Quote, the most important thing to remember is that everything changes, and industries on the cusp of technology change even faster. What is changing today will be the norm of tomorrow and old news in a couple of years, unquote. Now, I worry for non-marketers because they'll hear people like us explaining changes, and they may raise questions that I interpret as them doubting my competence. But I think the takeaway is, as you tell them new information, if it happens to clash with previously true information, instead of worrying about it eroding your credibility, think about it a different way. And I got this from Amanda Farley. She said, quote, we have to start with our mindset. If we say things like, this change sucks, and I'm nervous, well, that's not right. We have to see this change as the new reality. It's going to be ongoing. And I really took that to heart. Something I've learned through the podcast is that how we do analytics has changed in tandem with the way that software architecture has changed. Now, I'm grateful that when marketing went digital, we got systems that collected data. It's a necessary prerequisite of doing any analytics. But the old systems were flawed, because they sat on a server that you could only access through a coded application. And the user interface kept that data under wraps. You could only view it the way that they had defined it. Now, I don't want this to sound like this is developers' fault. On the contrary, I marketed software for a decade and a half in roles ranging from product manager to building the content and the campaigns that promoted software. I was doing this back when software ran on a Windows client-server environment before it moved to software running on the web. And throughout that time, developers themselves were limited by the database model that lay underneath the software. Whenever they tried updating software to meet the needs of customers, they ran into their nemesis, the data model. And those systems are known as code-first systems. Coding back then involved designing the interface and the functionality together. Somewhere along there, they decided how the application would store data. They did think of ways that data might be used, but their decisions of how different pieces of data related to each other was dictated by what the application needed then. It was baked the moment they finished coding. And it wasn't predisposed or configured in any way that's analytically useful. As an example, if you built an application that made an online address book that was meant to keep track of who to send Christmas cards to, and maybe you'd have the house's landline number so that you could invite them to a holiday party. If you did this, it would make sense to store information for each household. So you'd make a table that was at the address level, since with that, you could just mail a Christmas card to a whole family, or make one phone call to invite them all to the party. But if the software later on needs to handle people that move out, you want to track cards that they got where they lived before and where they live now, or it needs to send Christmas texts, well, now your contact list needs to track things at an individual level. Some individuals will have smartphones that are able to receive texts, and others you're going to have to do something different because they have landline numbers that won't. We're now, of course, dealing with an entirely different paradigm for our data model. And according to Murphy's Law, this revelation will only come after the software is put in the wild and hits the functionality requirements like this that never dawned on the developers. And those of us analyzing data, we try to use some of this code-first software and we export the raw information out of these systems. But this doesn't solve the issue. When we go to create a report on things that we care about, we end up having to query multiple tables to compensate for the fact that the database doesn't store the data in a way that would answer our question. And the ways that we can connect tables is hemmed in by the constraints baked into, you guessed it, the data model. We've seen in the last few years the rise of a new architecture known as MOC, which stands for Microservices, API First, Cloud-Based, and Headless. And you can think of this just simply by the name API First. And API First architecture breaks up that monolith, and it allows different pieces to reside anywhere, as long as they can be accessed over the internet. And APIs can anticipate the needs of analysts. They're a much better way to get at data so that it can be loaded into systems and we can analyze it. So when it comes to looking at your first-party data, the analytics that you have on it, you can take Google Analytics, and even though it has a history of being a script-based tool that was only accessed through a user interface on a web browser, it's now changed. Now, Google Analytics and others don't have to be SaaS tools that you log into. Tools that center around databases exist, like Snowflake and Databricks, and they can be configured not to give you just an extracted copy of data, but to actually change the model that the data is built on. It's all in the cloud. So the key difference in how it's running becomes who's paying to store it. And ownership of that data is no longer dictated by the technology, but instead, who's paying for it. And with data centers processing data on a huge scale, the amount that you have to pay to have your data in your control is now much more affordable than it used to be. As guest Brett Serjeantson said, quote, "It's in the best interest of organizations to own their own data, as opposed to accessing their data through a proprietary SaaS solution. Many organizations can now better engineer their own cost-effective solutions." Brett acknowledges that there's more to it than connecting to a data warehouse alone. You have to design some kind of business-oriented queries and workflow that does something based on the data coming back. But your business's needs are unique, so you're customizing whether you use a SaaS or not. Applying this to Google Analytics, whose data now sits on Google Cloud Platform, specifically BigQuery, you could go straight to that data yourself. You don't have to log into the Google Analytics web interface to see that same data viewed only by the generic reports that they set up. That UI doesn't allow actions to be taken on business logic either. And here's what Mark Edmondson had to say about accessing this data through BigQuery when he came on the podcast. Quote, "There are more technical things that you can do rather than just having this software as a service. I think the demand from users has been to have more control. People's demand has been saying things like, why can't we just build our own system? Why can't we define things ourselves? Google's answer is, now, provided you know how to do it, we'll give you the tools. There's a lot of scope for companies to treat Google Analytics 4 as just the source of the data and then build these things on top," unquote. So once you stop thinking about menus and fields containing data on a screen and you shift to the back-end warehouse, where you are natively interacting with data that's captured and arranged however you want, you can come up with a much better and more customized analysis. And you can strategize better by running that data through machine learning to predict which audiences would react to your marketing, and you can build that so that it works automatically. And for data sitting in third-party tools, it can now be meshed with analytics data thanks to things like APIs. When he came on the show, Bob Moore said that it was the, quote, "API economy that's made it so possible for modern products to be so deeply integrated with one another," unquote. My advice, if you haven't looked at this recently, would be to dig into how APIs and data warehouses can make your life easier. That's it for the things that I've learned from guests on the show, at least up until this point. I hope to be able to give you more of these lessons in subsequent podcasts. That's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank you so much for listening to the end of what is episode 200. I'm going to ask one thing from you. Please let me know what kind of shows you want to hear in the future. I have a lot of topics in store, as well as some amazing guests. And you're going to notice a couple of changes of format and perhaps of offerings related to the show. And I'm going to keep encouraging you to get more insight into your marketing so that you can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.